I will take care of Ivy, so don't worry about anything else. I broke both my legs through my own carelessness and had to be hospitalized for a month. My husband was to take care of our only daughter, Ivy, during that time. However, my husband is not only extremely indecisive, but also a mother's boy. How could he possibly take care of Ivy for a month when my mother-in-law and Ivy are not getting along? I did some frantic rehabilitation and was able to leave the hospital a little earlier. But at that point, everything was too late. I decided to take revenge that was more painful than what my husband and mother-in-law had done to Ivy. My name is Hazel and I am 33 years old. We have a family of 3, Troy, who is 4 years older than me, and Ivy, who is in 1st grade. My father-in-law runs a company and my husband works for him. We met through a friend. I couldn't believe that I was going out with the next president of the company, but my husband liked me better and we soon developed a relationship. I felt that he was older and more masculine and receptive, but I realized after we were married that this was not the case. The day I met my parents-in-laws for the first time, my mother-in-law liked me very much. At the time, I did not understand why she liked me so much, but after seeing her several times, I began to understand. Hazel is 4 years younger than Troy. With this, I think she will give birth to a healthy boy who will be my heir right away. When she said that, I felt a thrill. Could it be that she was looking at me as a tool to have a child? I had a hunch. And my hunch was right. Our new home after marriage was an apartment within a 10-minute walk of my parents-in-law's house. My husband insisted that we live in this apartment. I would have preferred to live a little further away from my parents-in-law's house, but my husband was adamant. The reason why my husband insisted on the apartment was because he was an extreme mother's boy. My mother-in-law also spoiled him. The manly and patient figure I thought he had when we were dating was an illusion he had created in order to marry me. In reality, he was an indecisive man who couldn't even decide what color tie to wear that day. I was really surprised the first day I found out about it. I thought he was mumbling to himself in front of his closet in the morning, but it turned out he was on a video call with his mother. "Mom, I have a meeting with an important business partner today. Which color tie do you think is best?" What he was showing was a reddish tie and a light blue tie. Who cares which is better? I was dumbfounded and watched the situation some more. "Troy, you look better in blue, so you should go for the light blue tie. You'll look more manly that way." I don't know. Haha, if Mom says so, then so be it. I'll wear the light blue tie today, thanks. With that, the video call seemed to hang up. Gross. I let out a small voice. No, it would be weird if I didn't have a voice. It was such a shocking moment. After that, my husband continued to video call my mother-in-law every morning. By the time a month had passed, I no longer felt anything, but that did not change my perception that this was abnormal. This relationship between my husband and mother-in-law would change once we had a child together. That is what I thought. However, I was naive. When I decided to go back to my hometown to have a baby, my husband began to stay at my parents-in-law's house and spent his days having a sweet time with my mother-in-law. My parents' house was about a 2-hour drive away, so he used that as an excuse. I'm busy this week. I was going to come over there on my day off, but my mom told me to take the day off, so I'm sorry I can't make it. He never came to check on me at all. To top it all off, I called him when I started having contractions, but he didn't show up until the next day. My husband's excuse was, "Mom told me it was a girl anyway, so there was no need to rush." I really wanted to come. But I wanted to hear what my mother had to say. That's what he said. Anyway, what my mother-in-law said came first. My wife's needs came second or third. I realized during the birth of my child that even my own child would not come to see me if my mother-in-law instructed me to. I was sure he would change when we had a child. I had thought so, but my husband was just doing his mother-in-law's bidding without any awareness of his role as a father. I chose the name of our newborn child and named her Ivy. I thought that if I left it to my husband, he would consult with my mother-in-law and name her something appropriate. I strongly felt that I had to protect Ivy. After spending a month at my parents' house after the birth, the day I finally returned home, my husband came to pick me up, but my mother-in-law was sitting next to him. Why my mother-in-law? I immediately knew the reason. Hazel, your duty is to give birth to a boy. You may have a hard time taking care of Ivy, but you need to think about your next child right away. No, it is crazy to talk to me, only a month after the birth, about our next child. My husband also said, I'd rather have a boy, too, to be honest. Girls, I don't know how to handle them. He laughed and said it as if he was denying Ivy's existence. I had nothing but anxiety about my future life. 7 years later, Ivy was in the first grade of elementary school. We had never had a child. My mother-in-law kept putting pressure on me, to the point of stressing me out. I believe that this pressure was the reason why we could not have children. Nevertheless, I had Ivy as my emotional support. She has grown up to be a kind and lovely girl. Thinking about my future, I resumed working as a web designer, which I had been doing before my marriage, 4 years ago. Since I am an individual web designer, I didn't have any work at first. Little by little, I built up a track record, and now I am busy. One day, I had a face-to-face meeting with a client that I usually communicate with via remote meeting. The meeting went unexpectedly long, and it looked like Ivy would not make it home in time. On the way home, I was descending the stairs of a pedestrian bridge in a hurry to get home, when I stepped off the stairs at a very high place. I fell to the bottom and lost consciousness. The next thing I knew, I was in a hospital bed. I was surprised to see the strange ceiling, but I quickly remembered that I had fallen and tried to get up. Hazel, did you notice? It was my husband who was by my side. You fell down the stairs and someone nearby called an ambulance. I immediately thought to myself, Ivy? Where is Ivy? I left her with my mother, so she's fine. My husband answered flatly. I can't believe I left her with that mother-in-law. Just as my mother-in-law dislikes Ivy, Ivy does not like my mother-in-law. What kind of thought process does my husband have to go through to leave Ivy with her so easily? I have to go pick Ivy up as soon as possible. As I said this, my husband confronted me with an unbelievable fact. Hazel, take a good look. Both of your legs are broken. It looks like it was broken badly and you need to have an operation. That's why you need to stay in the hospital for a month. It was a cruel sentence. Who in the world will take care of Ivy while I am in the hospital for a month? I fearfully asked my husband. Who is going to take care of Ivy while I am in the hospital for a month? Of course it's me. Who else is there? The only other person I can think of is my mother-in-law. You're going to ask your mother to help, aren't you? Well, that's just the way it is, isn't it? What's wrong with helping your mother out when I'm busy with my work? It's not just a matter of what's wrong. As I said before, my mother-in-law and Ivy are not the best of friends. And yet, I'm glad you're taking care of her, but I think it would be better to have Ivy stay with me at my parents' house. Huh? What are you saying? She's going to elementary school. There's no way I'm leaving her at your parents' house. My husband proceeded with his story in a pissed-off tone. Anyway, I will take care of Ivy. If you're worried about Ivy, why don't you just do your best to shorten your stay in the hospital as much as possible? I will do my best even without being told. Even so, there is no way that the hospital stay will be extremely shortened. I am so worried about Ivy's 1 month. During my month in the hospital, my husband came to visit me occasionally, but I did not see Ivy. I would call her once in a while. Ivy, how are you? I think I will be home soon, so please wait for me. Yes, Mom, please come home soon. She seemed somewhat listless. I worked harder than anyone else when rehabilitation started so that I could leave the hospital as soon as possible. Even so, my discharge from the hospital was shortened to only 3 days. On the day of my discharge, I asked my mother to pick me up from my parents' home, which was unreasonable. I did not want to rely on my husband or mother-in-law. When I arrived home, I found Ivy alone. Ivy. I ran over and hugged Ivy. She looks thinner than she did a month ago. I thought it was my imagination, but when I looked at Ivy more closely, I saw that her clothes were somewhat stained and her face looked a little gaunt. What is going on? Anyway, it is time to go, and I decide to prepare dinner. My mother tried to change Ivy's clothes, but all the clothes were all dirty. I had no choice but to put everything in the washing machine and start the laundry. For a while, Ivy wore my t-shirt like a dress. Dinner was ready and the 3 of us, including my mother, were about to eat it, but Ivy would not touch her food. Does it hurt anywhere? I spoke to her gently. Dad and Grandma. Ivy began to speak in a quiet voice. It was a shocking story. While I was listening to Ivy's story, my husband came home. I'm home. Hazel was home. I pulled Ivy and my mother's hand and left the house with the bare necessities, wallet, phone, and car keys. I found myself in a hurry, so I made Ivy wear sandals, but I was barefoot. My mother drove us to the police station. As soon as we arrived at the police station, we told them what happened. Ivy had been neglected. Although she managed to attend elementary school, She did not have any clean clothes because she was not allowed to wash her clothes and had to change into new clothes whenever they got dirty. The food was also terrible. My mother-in-law used to come over to cook dinner, but she only cooked for herself and my husband. She would cook breakfast on a whim only sometimes when she was in a good mood, but she would not let Chol eat it with them, and she would put her plate under the dining room table and eat on the floor. Of course, cooking breakfast never crossed my husband's mind, and as soon as he finished preparing himself, he left the house. How could he be expected to take care of Ivy? I had nothing but anger toward my mother-in-law and my husband. At the police station, as soon as they finished listening to my story, they went to my husband and mother-in-law to talk to them. My mother and I and Ivy decided to stay at a nearby business hotel that day. The next day, Ivy told me something she hadn't told me yet. Every once in a while, my dad and a woman I don't know would come over. Ivy was told to stay in her room and not to go out. A young woman. If not, that would be his cheating on me. How much more insulting do you have to be to me and Ivy? I was told that my husband and mother-in-law were being held by the police. I still did not want to go home, so I rented a weekly apartment without telling my husband and spent my time taking Ivy to and from elementary school by myself. While Ivy was at elementary school, I went to talk to the neighbor of the apartment. The neighbor was someone who knew about the rumors in the apartment, and although I normally did not have much interaction with him, I went to talk to him for advice. I knew that he knew that my husband was bringing a young woman into the apartment. He even said that he had secretly taken a picture of it. She opened the front door a little and took pictures from there. I got the photos on my phone. This should somehow prove the affair with Ivy's testimony and the photos. 3 days later my mother-in-law and husband were taken to the police station. I received a phone call from my father-in-law. He wanted to apologize and cooperate with me. My father-in-law was basically the type of person who would not interfere with us, but I thought he was a trustworthy person. So I decided to accept his offer. We met at a coffee shop, and as soon as we met, my father-in-law got down on his knees and apologized. Look up, father-in-law. Besides, this is a coffee shop. You're disturbing the other customers. Finally, my father-in-law looked up at me and said, I'm really sorry about what my wife and son did to Ivy. I hear it's neglect. How is Ivy doing? I take her to and from school. She is eating meals little by little. Also, there is one more thing I need to tell you about Troy. I showed him the photo I had sent to my phone. Troy is having an affair with this woman. Ivy testified to this. When my father-in-law saw the picture, he was horrified. This woman and Troy. Yes, but do you know anything about this woman? This woman is my secretary. What a surprise! It seemed that my husband had found an unfaithful partner in a familiar place. I see. Father-in-law, you said on the phone yesterday that you would help us. Do you have any idea who the lawyer is? I have no intention of forgiving my mother-in-law or Troy. I smiled and said that. Of course, I'll make sure to refer you to a lawyer who specializes in this field. Is there anything else? What are you going to do with your wife? I'm going to leave my wife. I don't want to spend the rest of my life with a person who abuses her grandchild. And Troy will be fired from his job. I will also cut off the relationship between father and son. They should be punished to that extent. I see, it seems that the father-in-law is going to hunt those two down. Then so do I. With that in mind, I vowed once again to take revenge on my husbands. In the end, my husband and mother-in-law were sentenced to prison for abandonment of a person responsible for their protection. I heard that the prison term was short, but it must have been very hard on these two proud people. My husband and I divorced through an attorney while he was in prison. And when they were both released from prison after serving their sentences, they immediately received a hefty bill from their lawyer. Alimony to Ivy, medical treatment for her emotional trauma, expenses, and child support. And then there was the fee for cheating on me. In total, it must have been close to $10,000. The woman with whom my husband had an affair disappeared before he could pay her alimony, so my husband had to pay her on top of the total. My ex-husband, who was not satisfied with the situation, insisted that we go to court to fight us, but there was no lawyer to defend him, so we could not go to court and he agreed to our demands. I thought it was a waste of time and money, even though I knew it was going to happen from the beginning. My mother-in-law also told me that her divorce from my father-in-law had been finalized. My mother-in-law is also supposed to pay alimony to Ivy. I think the amount was too lenient for my mother-in-law who had suffered for Ivy for the past 7 years, but still, I think it was a reasonable amount of alimony considering her future life. After that, it seems that my mother-in-law and my ex-husband started living together. They had been protected by my father-in-law, but they lost that backing. They used to live in a big house and even in an apartment of a reasonable size, but now they are renting a cheap and small room in a ramshackle apartment. The apartment barely has a unit bath, but even so, their last remaining pride must have been shredded. My ex-husband has sent his application to several companies to pay off his debts, but none of them will hire him because of his criminal record. Also, it seems that it will be very difficult for him to get another job since he was able to get by with his father's help. Even so, the deadline for repayment of the debt is coming, so he is currently doing manual labor to make some money. My mother-in-law is also in a situation where she has to work, but she seems to be trying to cling to her ex-husband to survive. We, on the other hand, have decided to move closer to my parents' house. Ivy has to change schools, but she says, "I don't care where I go as long as I'm with my mom." I was relieved to hear that she has made friends at her new school. My work is going well and we have enough money to live with Ivy. With the help of my parents, I will love and raise Ivy as much as I can.